Okay, good morning, folks, and welcome. Rick here, Rick Singleton from Queen's College, and delighted to have you on with us this morning. I know some people who normally attend both here and online have other things on the go, and it's quite understandable as we're launching into the Lenten season, but they'll be doing this class by viewing the recording. And so welcome to you all, those who are here with us today and those who are viewing it in the recording. So we'll start with a prayer. And now that we're into the season of Lent, we'll take a moment just to focus our thoughts and our prayers that way. Heavenly Father, we turn to you as we launch into the season of Lent, asking you to give us the courage to look inside ourselves, ponder our hearts and our intentions, and to be aware of our capacity to influence others on their journeys, both those that are intended and those that are by circumstance. I pray especially that you give guidance, insights for those who have a role in formation of others in preparation for ministry. I ask this in the name of Jesus, the Lord. Amen. So we'll get right down to business. So here's what we're going to focus on today are some things about administrative matters. Now, I want to kind of forecast for you that we're not going to go through all kinds of policies and procedures and those kinds of things, but I want to chat a little bit about the relevance of that as part of the supervision for trainees and others as well, actually, and some of the challenges that might come there. So we'll let that unfold over the next few moments. Also, I had prepared this class with the anticipation that Father Kellett would be with me, or the Venerable Neil Kellett, as some of the students like to remind us that that's his title. But Neil had been the executive archdeacon here in the Diocese of Eastern Newfoundland and Labrador, and has good insights and experience with those things. But he had an issue come up with a tooth, and so he's gone off to the dentist now. Might be back before we finish, but we'll see. If not, we'll have him join us on this next time round. And then we're going to spend some time on the text by Matthew Floating, Engage, and the students have who are doing this for credit have synopses prepared under chapters, and we'll do that. But before we do any of that, I sent a note to all of you highlighting the fact that a fair number of the students who are in the course and who would be doing chapters next time will be on the retreat. The Diocese of Western Newfoundland has a retreat in that first week, last week of February and first day of March, which was our scheduled day. So I sent a note asking if anyone had any problem with us changing the date of the next class from March 1st on to March 8th. And I asked particularly if anyone had a problem with it to reply to me. They didn't have to reply to all if they were, but anyway, I haven't had any objection to it. So I take it from that, and had, I think, many responded that they were fine with it. So we'll change our next class to March 8th, and I'll send a note to all hands today, and keep reminding you, you know the way I do that, to make sure that people don't get tangled up in the dates. So there it is. The synopsis for readings, this will be scheduled, will be coming to when we come to it in a few moments, or a little bit longer. So, administrative matters. What I want to kind of put a bit of focus on this morning is, well, the need and importance of people who are preparing for ministry to be aware of the place of administration in their jobs. I mean, in a lot of situations, you may have committees and councils and vestries and different boards and what have you that administer things on your behalf and with you and so on. But there is a point at which certainly the person in the pastoral leadership role has to be at least aware of how this stuff works, and in many cases they are the ones who kind of have to be accountable for it. And so I want to kind of approach this in a couple of ways. One is that I'd like to take a few moments to chat with you about the burden that administration is on people in ministry because of the challenges that come, particularly financial challenges in trying to maintain buildings and pay the bills and all the things that go with it as population and contributions shrink and costs go up as well. So we're going to take a few moments to throw it open to ask. I'd like to hear of your observations and experiences and advice on that one. And the second thing that I want to kind of draw us into a little bit of discussion on will be the notion of moral distress. I've probably chatted about this before, but I want to kind of chat about that as a significant factor in the lives of any person in a leadership role. And but we'll come to it. But first of all, I want to kind of throw out for general discussion, like, how relevant is administration in the doing of work? How much time does it take? How much demand does it take? How much stress does it cause? And I'll just throw it to anyone who'd like to share a thought or an idea, an insight from your own observations with others, or the structures that within you, which you work, and particularly if you're willing to share things from your own experience. So I'll just throw it open.
This is Kay.
Okay.
For me, administration is surprisingly takes up a great deal of our time as clergy. I come from an administrative lifetime of background of work, but there are times when it's frustrating because we have to put the ministerial seems to take priority, or the administrative seems to take priority over some things that you wish you could do, or some things that you think your time and talents would be better served doing. But especially in rural areas, you end up doing a lot of these things yourself, and have to be responsible for them, or at least coordinating them, if not doing them yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I hear what you're saying. Anyone else with comments or observations on this matter?
Paulette here.
Paulette?
I found in my two parishes that I've had so far that administrative, up till a few months ago, hadn't been a very big part of my duties, because in the parish of Port Sanders I was before, everything kind of was running like a well-oiled machine, and the lay ministers kind of took on a lot of duties that lay ministers normally don't, you know, and I think it was because they were without clergy for a while, and they could kind of run the parish, and every meeting we had to figure out what was happening next would include them, you know, as a team. So that really helped. Now I had to do a few things, like do my own bulletins and stuff, but that wasn't a big deal. But the general running and a lot of the administrative stuff I didn't have to do. And then the same when I came to Deer Lake, it was really good, even better in some ways, because I had people actually in the office doing things, you know, voluntarily. But I had one person move away and one person die, and now I'm trying still, and that was the fall, and I'm still trying to sort it all out. So I've really found the stress of that, and it's been a different few months completely than, you know, even trying to figure out what needs to be done when somebody was kind of doing everything from the accounting software to where's the paper towels for the washroom, you know, like. So I've gotten a good dose of it over the last few months. So it can be very stressful, because I'm normally not stressed, but I've been very stressed over the last few months. Yeah. And I think yeah. So it's excuse me. It can be really different depending on your situation, right?
Oh, indeed. Yeah. Yeah. And especially in places where, you know, where things are getting tougher all the time. Older
Yes.
populations, you know, migration, those factors that hit us pretty heavy here in parts of Newfoundland. Not sure if it'd be the same experience in New Brunswick. Other comments, though? Want to give everyone an
It's
opportunity.
Bob here.
Who's that? Oh, Bob, yeah.
Bob. Yeah. I guess for administrative, it in the past it hasn't been on my desk a whole lot, but in the last few years it has. Our lady who does the bulletins was no longer able to do it, so I jumped in on that and had never really tackled bulletins before, but once I got the template set up, I was okay, and I don't mind it. And of course, then she's also our vestry clerk, so she stepped down from that, so we had to fill that hole. But years ago, before I got into ministry, I went to community college and I took business administration, which for me has been quite helpful, if not just for the being able to type. That is a major thing because there's a lot of that involved. And but I don't find that I spend a whole lot of time during the week on administration. And of course, one week will differ from another, but we have good people here. The wardens are good and the treasurer is really good. So I'm not inundated with too much. So that's my take on it.
Good, thanks, Bob. I was lucky. And having that proper training yourself makes a big difference, huh?
James here.
Hey, James, yeah.
So far, I've been very fortunate. Buren does one run at this point, like a well-oiled machine. I'm very thankful that the venerable Terry Keynes was here before me, and he managed to get it all working nice and shipshape. But I have absolutely no background in administration, and so I've made it. I've thought it was a good policy to try and learn how to do as much of it as I could, while there's still people here, so that should circumstances change, then I can pick up the slack as necessary. And thankfully, well, my technical skills have helped with that. So.
Yeah. Well, the computer piece of it wouldn't be any problem for you, for sure. Great, thanks, James. Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone with any comments about how they've seen this play out in the lives of people who were probably in particularly difficult situations with where there was significant financial problems or issues around accountability and allegations and those kinds of things? They sometimes happen.
Hi, it's Ruby here.
Ruby.
One of the things that I'm finding is I have 5 churches and 2 of them are 45 minutes away from the other. I know others have that situation as well, but trying to keep up on what everyone is up to. I have wonderful treasurers, and my wardens in general are very good, for keeping an eye on stuff. But, as you're saying about administration, there are canons, there are policies, and trying to help people understand that, we should be following these rules. Sometimes it's quite difficult because it's hard when churches are struggling financially. They can't understand, well, why can't we have JCAs, or why can't we, in Western Newfoundland, we're not allowed to have alcohol in our halls, and they can't understand why they can't put on a dinner and serve alcohol and all that kind of stuff. And so you're dealing with trying to maintain church policies and canons when the secular world is pushing against you all the time, and helping people to understand that. I find that one of the difficult challenges for me.
Yeah. Those are very practical issues and what have you, and trying to justify sometimes the diocesan policy that, people look at other denominations or other communities and organizations and see what they're doing. Chase the Ace is a good example, or bingo, or having rentals for weddings and those types of things. And sometimes, I'm sure, for pastors themselves, they're in situations and they kind of think, man, this wouldn't be as tough for me if we could only, put on a fundraiser like everyone else does, kind of thing, for sure. And trying to rationalize, I suppose, or present in the context of where the policy comes from, if in fact you can rationalize it. Any other comments or observations here? So one of the things that I have noticed in our students who are going out, many of them in identifying their learning goals want to have some opportunity to see the administrative side of a parish, you know, to go out in internships to prepare for to prepare themselves for full-time ministry as a pastor. And it's one of the things most want, and certainly their supervisors are usually very generous in helping them to have the experience, oftentimes doing exactly what you folks do, not so much showing them themselves as putting them, you know, in the situations to be shown by the person who looks after the books or prepares bulletins or whatever the case might be. And one of the pieces that I think I'm always pleased with the supervisors who, in the midst of that, try to point out to the students the importance of making sure you don't try to do all of those things yourself, because there are people who likely have that a stronger skill set in doing those things than you yourself would have with a pastoral training. So that delegation or collaboration is probably a better word for it, because delegation kind of suggests that, well, it's your responsibility, but you get somebody else to do it on your behalf. But in many situations, it's better to understand that it's all of our responsibility, and so the right person is the one with the right skills and willing to put the time and effort into making it happen. But certainly, when
Can I just say, Rick, it's Kay. On the opposite end of that, I find myself on the completely opposite end because of my previous career. I find myself struggling with not doing something myself because I could probably do it quicker or more efficiently than the person who is willing to do it. So I struggle on that end as well.
And that's an interesting point. That actually is a perfect segue into that bulletin that I have there, teaching old dogs new tricks and teaching new dogs old tricks. Because for many people today in training, and a lot of the people who are supervising in parish contexts and so on, were people who went into ministry earlier in life, you know, maybe went on through school, college, seminary, and what have you, and they have students with them. But many today that you would be providing supervision for are people who are well through a career, maybe even retired. In many cases, people who are doing studies not in as formal a full 3-year program kind of thing as has been the way. And so in some ways there's a new challenge today around these things for the person who is the supervisor to be aware that the person may come to me with a lot of skills and a lot of experience way beyond my capacity to teach them anything. But part of it then is looking at it in that bigger picture of what is the pastor's role. And Kay, your example is an excellent one here, where you have that background and training and competency yourself. And so it's easier, as often happens, to do it yourself than it is to get someone else to do it. But then part of the challenge is to stand back and say, well, is this the best way to do it for the long haul? So and the other aspect I want to bring into this is when you have people, because it's in a kind of a different lens of supervision, but as the pastor in the parish, you have people doing things and they volunteer to do them, but sometimes they want to do them the way that they are familiar with. And they work for a fish plant, or they work for a manufacturing company, or a school board, or a healthcare system. And the temptation is to say, well, this is how we do it at work, and it works. It's so easy, and what have you. So that's how we should do it here. And sometimes that could be a challenge as well, because you have to comply with the formats that are laid out by the auditors for, the diocese or whatever the case might be. So that sometimes becomes a bit of a challenge as well, that getting people who already have a skill set to readjust their skill set. And I'm talking here about administrative matters, but you can get the same thing kind of for a person who probably has a career as a teacher, and their way of approaching matters, for instance, might be more towards the typical classroom that they've spent 30 or more years in, than it is in the context of what you would be doing in a parish children's liturgy or something like that. I just throw that out there, and love to hear comments and observations on any of that, and particularly from UK, if you'd want to pick up from where you left off before I kind of threw out the teaser of old dogs and new tricks, and new dogs and old tricks.
Well, I am an old dog, and this is a new trick.
Not at all.
but it is a struggle, because you have to be mindful that others have gifts to offer, and sometimes we can strengthen their gifts. And we also have to keep in mind that we will be leaving this parish, but they will be staying. So you want to leave them better equipped than when you came, hopefully. And oftentimes too, when people in your congregation, like if you have a treasurer who struggles with trying to do what they're doing, and then they hear that you were an accountant for 40 years, well, their first thought is, oh, well, so it is, you walk a fine line of doing what's best in the situation and in the time, as opposed to what's best long term.
Yeah.
Or that's how I find it.
Yeah.
And when we come with strengths, and you'd like to use your strengths. But I stopped being an administrator, because I wanted to stop being an administrator. I want to have pastoral role. So you also want to make people aware of, you need your time for other things as well.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Kay. Others with comments or observations?
Bob here again.
Bob, great.
Gee, I don't know. I mean, I just mentioned the lady who was doing our bulletins, and I visited her one day and asked her to do up a notice for me, and she said, I'll type it. And then it was a one-finger typing. And of course, then I realized, I hadn't put her in that position. That had been done before I got there. But it probably wasn't really fair to put her in that position, because she was not a typist. And it was what would take me 20 minutes would take her 4 or 5 hours to do on a bulletin, because she was, it was painstaking work for her. I guess another thing too, in terms of treasurers, last year we lost our treasurer, and of course I decided to look for a new one, and I found a retired bank manager. Now, you don't always get that lucky, but at least I knew that, she would have to have some training, but for the most part, she would fit into the role quite well. When it comes to administrative, though, I was thinking one of the things I really hate doing, and I don't know if you folks do it in Newfoundland, parish statistics. And we have to do those once a year in March, and we have to bring out all the vestry books and count how many services and how many people. And anyways, once it's over, it's okay, but I really don't look forward to it. So anyway, there's my piece.
Oh, yeah. I think those are the tedious things that most people dread. I'm not sure, but I am pretty sure that they have the same system here. Someone, Jolene, or someone who's in ministry here, or Paulette, anyone can comment on what the routine on that is, and probably affirm that Bob is not unique in, or is not a New Brunswick frustration only.
Yes, we do. We do exactly the same thing. And up till this year when I came here, I had my warden used to just go do that and fill out the forms and everything, so I didn't even have to look at it. But she's the one that moved away, so it'll be interesting now in a month or so to see what happens with that, because I'm like Kay, I'm an old dog, and it is kind of hard to learn new tricks. But with my personality, I kind of find it easy to let people do things. But the problem I have is kind of like Bob said, like if someone's going to take a long time, and computers is what I was really into before I came into this. So I spent a lot of time trying to fix software and doing different things, because other people seem to, because most of my congregation that are really involved in the administration and the running of the parish are over 70. So it's most people that age are not very computer literate, right? So I spent a lot of time since the other guy died, because he was good, but learning and learning the new software. But as luck should have it, I'm the kind that even if I never saw it before, I can figure it out. So
Yeah.
that helps. But it does take a lot of time is the thing, and not time really that we have.
Yeah, well, those are some of the challenges, aren't they? You know, like as we look at the items there, I've mentioned the people coming in with careers and experience, and so you have opportunity to draw on that and help them. But they need the instinct that we all have is to align new things with what we already know. I mean, that's how most of us build on what we already know as new things are brought to us. And our first instinct is to try and establish how much of it is the same, so that the gap between what I have to take in here and what I already have aboard is smaller. And sometimes the effort might be made, depending on circumstances, but personality, I think, as much as anything else, to try and lessen the gap by trying to make it more like what we've already done. I mean, how often do we sit in conversations and something is brought to us, someone is sharing with us or describing or what have you, or we're doing the same with them, and the words in the conversation becomes, well, that's like, right? And quite often it's not like it at all, but we're trying to align it. We're trying to make sense out of what's new by fitting it into the paradigms that we already have in our minds, or the habits, or the routines, or the systems, or whatever lingo we use to describe it. So that's kind of an instinct we all have. It's, I suppose, embedded in us as one of those factors related to dealing with change and resisting change to some extent. So that's there, and that's why, sometimes we have to look, I suppose, at ourselves, but particularly if you're in a leadership role and you have either a trainee or somebody who's taking on a ministry within a congregation that is that's responsible and for which you're accountable, to make sure that they do it in the way that it needs to be done, rather than doing it in a way that is aligns with the way that they are used to doing it or have done it in other contexts and what have you. But what I want to take a few moments on now are the few points about the getting that balance, I suppose, between administrative functions and pastoral leadership. And then how much priority is there in time and attention? In some organizations, again, I'm doing it right here now, when I worked in healthcare, one of the things that we used on a regular basis were workload measurement. And workload measurement basically was a system that was designed and computerized and all that, but all employees were expected to be unit producing. They had to be doing the work and accounting for their time so that things could be measured out, and all of that rolls up into all these, systems that are done by the computers and so on, so that when it's all said and done, someone goes in with a heart attack, or someone goes in to have a baby, or someone's having a section or natural birth and what have you, we sometimes see the statistics of how much does it cost, for instance, to have, to deliver a baby by section as compared to a natural birth, or what is the cost of diabetes on the healthcare system? Well, a lot of the statistics that go into that come out of the workload measurement stuff, because it will calculate on this particular unit, this nurse worked this many hours, and there were this many patients, and these are the, and you know, there's a fair bit of fine tuning in it. So, but when it's all said and done, you would be able to look at your statistics and see, well, how much of our time do we spend actually doing patient care, for instance, in a hospital, as compared to doing administrative or paperwork, people might call it. In a pastoral context, things are so much more fluid. You know, you're responding to things as they come along for the most part, and I think sometimes too, the gaze on which people look at their pastor and people in pastoral leadership, they kind of come to it as old dogs as well, with, you know, you got to be out there, you got to be turning sod all the time, you got to be seen to be out active and visiting, and the appreciation for other things that are done in quiet and in private, and have to be the place of the pastor, you know, as one who has to study and dedicate contemplation and prayer and meditation to preparation of homilies and reflecting on matters of spiritual importance and so on. Like that's work as well. That's hard work. But how much priority and how do we sort that out in our own lives and places of work and job descriptions, if there are such things, becomes part of it. And part of, I think, what we have to have in the mindset for people who are you know, going out there as trainees or who are in a role within a parish that you are supervising them for whatever reason, either educational or formative, or as an employee of the parish. Comments on any of that?
Hi, Rick. It's Ruby again.
Good.
When I was in Nova Scotia PEI, the Diocese of Nova Scotia PEI, we had to fill out a form that gave a percentage of the various work that we did. I actually was just trying to find it, but I can't find it for all the details. But we had to, what percentage of time do you spend on preparation for sermons? What percentage of time do you do on pastoral care and stuff? That was the worst thing in my life I ever filled out. You know, how do you know? It changes from week to week. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
And but you have to be aware of it. And I know when I do my monthly reports for my vestry meetings and stuff here, I try to let them know, you know, how many services I've done, what meetings I've been at, what trainings I've been taking, what teaching I've been doing, and break it down a little bit that way. And for the folks here, they hadn't seen that before, and I think it helped open their eyes a little bit more to the work of what a minister does.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yes, it's very informative for people and helps them to appreciate, you know, those things that have to be done in private and in quiet. And as yesterday's gospel passage would lead us to, you know, Father sees into the secrets. And those are the places where, you know, the pastor has to go, the person in ministry has to go. And so accounting for them is sometimes a challenge, because most people who will look at your reports haven't worked in systems where there would be much regard for time that's not spent, you know, kind of in harness, we might say.
Bob here again.
Bob, yeah.
First of all, shout out to Ruby. I used to be in the Diocese of Nova Scotia and PEI. I was thinking about the reporting part, and when I came to this parish here at the vestry meeting, like Ruby, I would, you know, give a report of what I've done during the month, and they were interested and amazed in a way. And I said, well, what's so interesting about that? And they said, well, really nobody's done that before. I said, well, I feel that I need to be accountable to you, and so therefore, you know, that's why I'm doing it. Now, I don't get into detail. I might say you know, hospital and home visitation, and no names are mentioned, but yet they get an idea of how many meetings I've attended, and we have to also, we get paid for our travel, so we have to let them know how many kilometers that we went that month. But I think it gives them, you know, it's good in a way, because they know that you're not just sitting behind your desk waiting for something to happen, that you're out there doing something. And I think it helps them to appreciate what you're doing a little bit more, as if on the opposite side of it saying nothing, you know, and them just assuming that you might be out doing something. But I have been in parishes where somebody would constantly say, you should visit this person or that person. I said, how do you know who I'm visiting? And my theory was that I'm hoping that I am going to run the parish and that the parish is not going to run me. Now, I'm not saying I'm not open to suggestions, but sometimes that can be the way it is, that they're pushing you so much that you wonder if you're in charge of your ministry or not. But I must say the parish I'm in now, we don't have that, and they're great people to work with and work for. So anyways, I'll let that go.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. And again, that's and thanks for mentioning that point of, you know, who's in charge, because you know, there has to be balance in that as well, doesn't there? You know. Yeah.
It's Dave Alston here. I have a few comments. One is that I found it useful to occasionally closely track 1 or 2 or even 3 or 4 weeks of a month and find out exactly where I am spending my time on, because it's fairly easy to say pass over these 15-minute chunks that end up adding up to 3 or 4 or 5 hours a week. And it's I found it useful as well to as Bob says report back to vestry as to what I've done. But another part of that is to make sure that vestry is aware that of the difference between a stipend and a salary, which they're not always aware of. Anyway, a couple of observations.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Actually, it might be worthwhile for you to make that point. What explanation do you give them between the difference in the stipend and the salary?
Well, I think it's most striking in a part-time posting is that priests and you know, curates don't work for a salary; they work for a stipend, so that they're not directly accountable for exactly how many hours. Because some months it's going to be 85, or some weeks it's going to be 75 or 85 hours, and another week it might be 15 hours. But the expectation is that over a year, a full-time ministry will occupy a reasonable portion of a full year's hours, but not necessarily. There's no guarantee it will, and then there's no guarantee that it won't be somewhat above that. And that doesn't mean that they're going to get an overtime bill either. They have to understand that one goes with the other. Yeah,
yeah. And I've heard so many people who've been in part-time ministry say how, especially people who were in retirement, but they say it's almost impossible to hold yourself to, you know, 20 hours a week or what have you, just by their own instinct and the demands. They find it, you know, impossible to kind of hold themselves back from doing more and more. And sometimes that can be a bit of an exploitation.
Bob here again.
Yes, Bob.
When I first came to this diocese 18 years ago, I was part-time, 3 days a week, and did that for 3 years, and then moved on and ended up at, I guess, 4 days a week. And it's just within the last 6 years that I've been full-time. So I've learned how to do a lot in a short period of time, but I've also learned that the only thing about part-time ministry is the money. Because, I mean, if somebody passes on a Thursday, you can't say, keep them on ice till Saturday because I'm on my day off. So, I mean, there's that way to look at it, too. And since I've been in this parish, after getting full-time, they have approached me. We have a scale here. After 11 years, you level out on your stipend. But this parish has, the first year, offered to give me a raise, and I said, well, it's okay, but they said, well, we think we should. And then the second year, they didn't bother asking, they just did it. So they can pay above scale if they want to, and that's fine. But I mean, I was in the workforce for a lot of years and used to working 40 hours a week. And now I use the unit system, morning, afternoon, and evening. And so if I do 3 units one day, I might do 1 the next, or 2. But I don't count them up at the end of the week to see how many I've had. But that's how I try to allot my time if I can. But I've never had really anybody say, you're not doing enough. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that to me, sometimes I think what we do is we put that on ourselves, and we say to ourselves, I'm not doing enough. Mm-hmm. But my wife is a priest as well, and we've had conversations, and I said, well, when the day comes that they come up and say that, fine. But until they do, I'm not going to assume that I'm not doing enough. Mm. Because I think we can be our worst enemy in that way. And, you know, it's tough enough as it is to do the work, and it can be a joy at times as well. But it's hard for people to, when you're in charge of yourself, you know, and that's what we are in a sense. We're calling the shots, you know. I'll pick a day off that I want to take, or maybe a day that I want to do this and that. And if you're used to working for somebody, you go in, you punch a clock, you go home, and that's it. But with this, you're sort of responsible for, you know, how busy you can get, or maybe not how busy you can get. And so there's sort of, as you said, there's a balance there, and we need to keep that in mind, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
It's Dave Alston again here. I bought an interesting book. It's a reflection on exactly what we're talking about here. It's called If You Meet George Herbert on the Road, Kill Him. And it's in Britain, there was there's a famous clergyman of the last century, or the century before, I guess now, called George Herbert, who wrote a handbook about how to act as a priest. Anyway, it's been something that many Church of England priests have been sort of held to. You better do what this guy did. You know, this is what we expect of you. And the thing was that George Herbert was only a parish priest for a relatively short period of time, something like 6 years. And during that time, he had 2 curates to assist him. So what is in the book is somewhat, let's say, fanciful in terms of the availability. But it's an interesting book if anybody cares to take a look at it.
Interesting, yeah.
Bob again. I guess with this thing about, you know, following somebody into a parish, you know, I try to make the distinction with people that I'm not them, they're not me. They had their ministry, I have mine. They have their gifts, I have mine. And I'm not here to replace them. I'm just here to do my ministry. And of course, you know, it can work the other way, where the person that you're following maybe wasn't that good at what they did. But I mean, then again, on the other side, maybe they did everything right. So I think the comparison thing, it takes a few months for people to stop talking about who was there before. But then again, as someone said, that when they came to a parish, someone had been there before and got things running pretty nicely. And what I've told people, you know, I said, you know, God was here long before I showed up. I'm just here to see what he wants me to do. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah. But it is such an important thing that, you know, ownership of the parish be the people's, and then that when you as pastor, it's a leadership role, and getting that right balance, and you know, a certain amount of engagement in conversations, whether it's in the context of strategic planning or having a parish pastoral plan, or something that gives some kind of a sense. And I think bring all the people into a bit of conversation about, you know, what's important in what we do. And because, you know, as we set our priorities, then we will sort out how much time and attention and budget and other things it requires. And times are changing immensely, and but sometimes we don't take the time to kind of stand back and look at it in the sense of, well, what are our priorities now? We're doing a bit of an exercise of that sort here at Queen's College, on the future of theological education, that the people who are preparing for ministry are not going out in to minister in the church that they grew up in. Many of occasions come when your connection with people is through weddings or funerals and what have you, when they're virtually disconnected, illiterate of worship and theology and sacraments and scriptures and what have you, and that's where the evangelization has to happen. And so, a substantial shift in some of that, and I think part of the challenge for the students going out and their supervisors and what have you is being aware of that significant shift that is happening culturally, so that people are aware that many of the people who are involved in the churches, in parishes, in congregations, are they're not typical of the people in their communities anymore. The typical people aren't involved with their churches, but they're consumers when they want it for their weddings or for their funerals and what have you, and that will be the focus, I guess, of the new evangelization, we might say. And so it becomes a challenge for everyone, trainees and supervisors and the people who are involved and committed in parishes as well, that we start to look at, where and how do we focus our ministry beyond those who are already attending and participating. And people often in congregations have a hesitation to wanting to open up very much to those who are disengaged, we might say. Any comments on that aspect of ministry, particularly in the context of providing supervision, not only to trainees, but in the sense of you're providing leadership in a congregation, and you have people in leadership roles on committees, and they're doing catechesis and helping with liturgies and what have you, and how you, for want of a better word, supervise them or oversee them, guide them and influence them towards a new evangelization.
Rick, it's Ruby. If I could just make a comment, I'd like to go to that church that you're talking about, because I find getting volunteers to do anything is almost impossible. Most of my congregation are older, and a lot of them have done their time, so to speak, or they're just not interested anymore. And so a lot of that falls on my shoulders, and I'm sure there's lots of other priests in charge and rectors out there who are experiencing the same thing.
Yeah,